Before we jump into the message this morning, I want to recognize another group that's with us here this morning. And so if you are a veteran and you're with us this morning, would you stand up, please? Tomorrow is Veterans Day, and all across the room our veterans are standing up, and we want to give them a round of applause for their service. Thank you for your service and your sacrifice. Jumping into the message, I want to just start with one word: denial. I don't know what comes into your mind when you hear the word denial, but if you're living as though you're not getting any older, you are living in denial. If you are living as though the Dallas Cowboys are playing as the best team in the NFL, you are living in denial. I'm a Cowboys fan, but I don't want to live in denial, right? If you are living as though Christmas is more than 45 days away, you are living in denial. If you're living like this lost an ad found that was found in a paper, I'll put it up here on the screen for you. Lost, three-legged dog, blind in right eye, left ear missing, broken tail, recently castrated, answers to the name Lucky. That is the definition of denial. If you're living as if you don't have any hurts, habits, or hang-ups, you're living in denial. We've all been hurt. We all have habits we would like to change, and we all have hang-ups we would like to overcome. Everybody needs to be restored. Everybody needs to be in recovery. We launched this message series last Sunday. We're going to be in it for 8 weeks, and it leads up to a new service, a brand new worship experience we're starting here at Aldersgate on Wednesday nights beginning January 8th called Celebrate Recovery. And it's all about finding freedom from our hurts, our habits, and our hang-up. In fact, if you would like to be a part of that service, even if you don't want to commit yourself yet, but you're interested and you think you might want to show up on January 8th, just real easily, you can text RESTORE. Now, I know the message series is titled Restored, but you can text one word, RESTORE, without the D on the end, to 806-745-0595. You can do it right now on your phone if you want to. We would like for you to do that because we want to launch that worship experience with 75 people. And so we want to know who has interest in being there on Wednesday nights. And we're preaching through it for 8 weeks here. Last week, we started with recovery principle number 1. Celebrate recovery principle. We had a great time last week. We talked about whack-a-mole and all kinds of stuff. If you missed it, go back. All of our messages are archived online. But here's recovery principle number 1. Realize that I am not God. Listen, if you think you are God, or if you're living your life like you're God, you are living in denial. Realize that I am not God. I am powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong thing, and my life is unmanageable. We're working through the Beatitudes. Last week we covered Matthew chapter 5:3. This morning we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5:4. If you want to go ahead and turn your Bible there or click on your phone there. Last week, Matthew chapter 5:3 was blessed, happy are those that are poor in spirit. What that means is blessed are those that realize they're not God and they are powerless to overcome their hurts, habits, and hang-ups by themselves. This morning, we're going to move on to Matthew chapter 4, but before we do, I want to go back to this concept of denial. And I want us to look at denial a little bit deeper, right? Because denial is what's keeping us from moving into recovery. Denial is what's keeping us from overcoming our hurts and changing our habits and finding freedom from our hang-ups. Denial is what keeps us from moving to that place. And we will never move into that place of recovery. We will never move into that place of freedom until the amount of pain we're experiencing because of our hurts, habits, and hang-ups exceeds the fear of change. In other words, we will never change anything in our life. We will never move away from our hurts, our habits, or our hang-ups until the pain that we're experiencing because of them is greater than the change we will go through to find freedom. Are you following me? And there are a few things in our lives that will bring about that pain when we're dealing with hurts, habits, or hang-ups. Number one, we may have a crisis in our lives. Like we may rock along for a while knowing that there's something present in our life, but eventually we'll get to a crisis. It may be a financial crisis. And we may have overdrawn funds, or we may have credit debt that we can't pay. There'll be some crisis in our finances that the pain all of a sudden becomes overwhelming, and we realize that we have to make a change. It may be a crisis in our marriage or another relationship. It may be a crisis at work. There's some crisis that happens in our life, and we realize we can't live in denial anymore. Sometimes it may be confrontation. In the recovery world, we like to say intervention, right? That someone that we know, that we love, that we respect, comes to us and says, man, you need to look at this in your life. You need to change this in your life. We have a saying here in Texas, that if one person calls you a donkey, we don't really use the word donkey, but you know the biblical word for donkey, right? If one person calls you a donkey, just let it go. If two people call you a donkey, you begin to think about it. If three people call you a donkey, you better start looking for a saddle. Confrontation. I've shared with some of you, if you've been at Aldersgate any length of time, there was a season in my life where I was in denial about some of the anger issues that I had in my life. And Amy had tried to confront me about those issues for a while. But it wasn't until one day I saw the look in my oldest son's eyes, that the pain from the confrontation that I saw in his eyes exceeded the denial that I was living in. And I realized that I had to make a change or do something different. It may be crisis, it may be confrontation, it may be catastrophe. And catastrophe is when the wheels fall off. It's when the bottom becomes more apparent. In recovery world, we speak of hitting rock bottom. And when we hit rock bottom, whatever that looks like, we understand that the pain we're living in is not worth continuing to live in, and we've got to make a change in our life. But we will never get past step one. We will never get past recovery principle one. We will never seek out the change we need in our life unless the pain from those hurts and habits and hang-ups begins to exceed the fear of changing, growing, and being transformed. And that's where we run into Matthew chapter 5:4 this morning. It's the second of the 8 Beatitudes. Matthew chapter 5, verse 4, if you're there in your Bible or on your phone, it says, blessed. We talked last week about that word just literally meaning happy, fulfilled. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. The promise from God is that when we get to those crises in life, when we have that confrontation come to us, when we hit rock bottom, we get to those places of mourning, and in those places of mourning, God promises His comfort. He promises He'll show up. He promises He will walk us through the change. He promises us that He will bring freedom. He promises us that He will help us find recovery from that hurt, that habit, or that hang-up, whatever it may be. He promises us, listen to this, grab onto this, hope. That when we're in that place, He gives us hope. As experts tell us that we can go 40-ish days without food, 3-ish days without water, 3-ish minutes without air, but we cannot go 1 second without hope. And wherever you are drowning in your hurt, your habit, or your hang-up, or let me say this, wherever you're drowning in your denial, the promise from God is that He wants to meet you in that place of mourning, that place of crises, that place of confrontation, that place of being at rock bottom, and He gives you the hope of comfort. Now, there are a couple of things that we have to do in order to hang on to that hope, to receive that hope. And so this morning I want to give you these two things, all right? Number one, we have to believe that God exists. If God is the one who gives the hope, then we have to believe in the giver of hope. We have to believe that God exists. I want to take you to another verse this morning. So you're going to move away from the Beatitudes and you're going to go to a book in the Bible called Hebrews. Now, by the way, I'm going to give you lots of verses this morning, and so if you want to jot these down, I would encourage you to do that. You'll have them, and you can always go back and look them up or study them deeper this week. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. I'm going to look at the second part of that verse, and here's what it says. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who seek Him. We must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who seek Him. Now, listen, I know a lot of you have some experience, or you have family members that have experience, or you know someone that has experience with a recovery program. And you know that in successful recovery programs, one of the things they talk about is a higher power, and surrendering to a higher power, and knowing a higher power, and letting the higher power intervene in your life. I want to introduce you to the higher power this morning. His name is God. His Son is Jesus Christ. And we must believe that He exists, and He's the one that brings comfort, and He's the one that brings hope, and He's the one that helps us find freedom from our hurts, our habits, and our hang-ups. Listen, here's how I'll say it. Anyone who would predict their own death and resurrection and then pull it off is someone we should probably pay attention to. Do you believe that? Anyone who would predict their own death and say that on the third day they're going to rise from the dead and then pull all of that off is somebody that I'm going to believe in. That's the higher power. And we have to believe that God, that Jesus Christ, His Son, exists. Now listen, the latest research from the Pew Study reports tell us that 80% of Americans believe in God. If asked the question, does God exist? The answer to that survey question is yes. But here's the second thing I want to share with you this morning. Not only do we have to believe that God exists, number two, we have to live as though God exists. If we want that hope, if we want that comfort, if we want that freedom, then it's not enough to just believe that He exists. We have to live as though He exists. And I'm going to give you 3 things this morning to help us live as though the higher power, as though God, as though Jesus exists. All right? So we got to believe He exists. We got to live as though He exists. And now I want to give you 3 things to help us live as though He exists. Number 1, we have to remember that God knows my situation. You have to remember that God knows your situation. To find hope in that crisis and that confrontation, when you hit rock bottom and catastrophe happens in your life, when you're finally at the point where you want to find freedom and recovery, you have to know that God knows your situation. He knows your hurts, He knows your habits, and He knows your hang-ups. He knows all of them. In fact, I'm going to give you some scripture this morning that shows us He knows that. Number 1, God knows our hurts. God knows your hurts, every single one of them. Psalm chapter 56, verse 8. Psalm 56, 8. You, that's referring to God, you have kept count of my tossings, put my tears in your body, in your bottle. You have kept count of my tossings. That's a Hebrew word that could be rendered struggles, frustrations. God knows all of those hurts. Every tear that you have shed, He's kept up with. God knows your hurts. You may say, well, nobody knows the pain I'm going through in this marriage. God does. Nobody knows the hell I go through at work every day. God does. Nobody knows how deeply wounded I was by that person. God does. Nobody knows. God does. God knows every single one of your hurts. And to find hope and recovery, you have to remember that. God knows all of your habits. A scary thought, isn't it? God knows every single one of your habits. Psalm 31, verse 7. Psalm 31, 7 says, you have seen my affliction. By the way, I'm reading out of the English Standard Version. You have seen my affliction. You have known the distress of my soul. Now, here's an interesting thing. That Hebrew word affliction, That word, the literal meaning of that word is defeat. Now I want you to think about a habit in your life that you have tried to overcome, and not found victory or not found freedom. And isn't it so defeating to not find freedom from that habit? Whatever habit it is. You keep trying, or you've done this, you've done that, you went to this seminar, you did this. Everything, you keep trying to overcome that habit, but you never can conquer it. And it's defeating. And the psalmist says, God knows every one of your defeats and the distress of your soul that comes with that. God knows my hang-ups. He knows your hurts. He knows your habits. God knows your hang-ups. Psalm chapter 69, verse 5. This is my favorite. You, referring to God, know my folly. The wrongs I have done are not hidden from you. Let me translate that from you. God knows every dumb thing you've done. Nothing is off the record with God. You may think you've kept it from everyone else, but God knows all your hang-ups. A couple of months ago, I officiated a wedding. And the wedding was in the Watson building here in town. And the Watson building, actually the wedding was in the Baker building. See, I'm getting confused just telling you the story this morning. The wedding was in the Baker building here in Lubbock, which is almost right next door to the Watson building here in Lubbock. The Baker building is at 1211 13th Street. The Watson building is at 1109 13th Street, just a block apart. I've done weddings in both, in fact, many weddings in both of the buildings, and I was to be in the Baker building. Friday evening, it was time for the rehearsal. I guess my mind was in a different place, and I showed up in the Watson building. And I just began to run everything like I would for any wedding rehearsal. The DJ came up and began to talk to me, and I told him where we would be and how everybody would be positioned, and we had the order of the service, and I know he was looking at me strange, but he was a DJ, right? I'm used to that. And then I started meeting some of the family. The bride and groom weren't there yet, but that's not unusual either. Sometimes they're not on time for the rehearsal, and so I start meeting some of the family, and I've never met any of them before, and so I don't know them. I don't know who they are, and I'm having conversations with people, and finally I meet this one guy, and he's like, yeah, I'm the best man. I'm the brother of the groom. And I said, oh, you're Albert's brother. And he said, no, I'm Mario's brother. Now, I'm not the brightest guy, but at that, I was like, I think I'm in the wrong place. And so I just said, oh, yeah, Mario. And I grabbed my stuff and I walked out and I went to the Baker building. Now you all know the dumb things I've done, but God knows every dumb thing we've done. He knows all of our hurts. He knows all of our habits. He knows all of our hang-ups. Listen, you need to let that sink in, because you may be trying to hide. You may be keeping secrets. And you may be thinking that nobody knows. But God knows. And He knows because He wants to bring you comfort. He wants to bring you hope. And He wants to bring you out of that place where the pain is. To live as though God exists, you've got to remember first and foremost that God knows your situation. He knows your hurts, habits, your hang-ups. The second thing you got to remember is this, is that God cares about your situation. Not only does He know about your situation, but He's a God that cares about your situation, and He gives you promises to hang on to in each of those situations. And I'm going to give you some promises here to hang on to in just a moment. And I was going to bring a book, and I forgot to do it, but here at Aldersgate, we have these little books. They're called Bible Promises books. And when you come to our healing prayer room that meets on the second Monday night of every month, so it's tomorrow night, 7 to 8, it's come and go. You come in here, and you just kind of pray by yourself for a little bit. You'll receive communion, and then the prayer team will take you into a room, and they'll just pray over Whatever it is, your hurt, your habit, hang up, the place that you need healing physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever. We give people who come to that a Bible promise book because this is so important. You need to know that God cares about your situation, and you need to know that God gives you promises in that situation. And that Bible promise book will help you find a promise that speaks exactly to your situation, and you hang on to that promise. Can I just give you a few blanket promises this morning? I'm just going to read through these really quickly. Psalm 46, verses 1 through 3. God is our refuge and strength. Whatever your hurt is, whatever your habit is, whatever your hang up, God is your go-to. He's your refuge. He's your strength. He's a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. Though the earth gives way, the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar in front. Let me tell you what the psalmist is explaining. He's explaining crises, confrontation, and catastrophe. When those things come upon us, God is our refuge and strength. He's a very present hope in trouble. Let me give you another one. Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10. Just hang on to this. Fear not, for I am with you. Nobody else may know, but God knows, and He's with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. One more. This is one of my favorites. Isaiah chapter 43, verse 2. When you pass through the waters, you just make a blank there and you substitute wherever it is your hurt, your habit, or your hang-up is today. When you pass through that hurt, habit, or hang-up, God says, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. You've got to find a promise from God to hang on to. Know that God knows your situation, and know that God cares about you in that situation. And here's the third thing, and you got to get this one, or none of this matters. If you want to live as though God really exists, you've got to remember that God has the power to change your situation. You've got to remember that God has the power to heal your hurt, to help you conquer that habit, to help you overcome that hang-up. God has the power to walk you through recovery. He has the power to bring you freedom. Let me give you a verse. Luke chapter 18, verse 27. What is impossible with man is possible with God. You see, many of us believe that God exists, but we don't live as though God exists because we haven't gotten to celebrate recovery step number 1 yet, where we realize that we are powerless. But we know the one who has all the power. And when we surrender to Him, sometimes He comes in and He changes our situation. Sometimes He comes in and He changes us. Sometimes He comes in and He changes both. But He has the power to help us find freedom. I was thinking about this week. I was looking at stuff in our kitchen. And I thought to myself, we've got a lot of appliances in the kitchen. We've got a refrigerator that keeps food cold. We've got a microwave that heats food up. We've got a stove that also heats food up. We don't use it very much. We've got a coffee maker. We use it every single day. But here's the thing I know about those appliances. They've got to be plugged in to work. If the refrigerator's not plugged in, it's not going to keep my food cold. If the microwave's not plugged in, it's not going to keep my food hot. If the coffee maker's not going to be plugged in, then I'm going to be grumpier than I normally am. Because every appliance, in order for it to work, has to be plugged into a power source. Listen, if you want to find hope, if you want to find comfort, if you want to find freedom, if you want to find recovery, you got to plug your life into the power source. It's not enough to just say, I know God exists. You got to live as though God exists. Let me give you Celebrate Recovery principle number 2. Earnestly believe that God exists, that I matter to Him, and that He has the power to help me recover. Let me take you back to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. Whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. 2 questions for you this morning. Number 1, are you living in denial of any hurt, habit, or hang up in your life? And number 2, if you're not living in denial, but you're struggling with any hurt, habit, or hang up, are you plugged into the power source? Or are you still trying to figure it out on your own? Just have you close your eyes and ask God to speak into you this morning. Just pray to yourself, to God, in your own words. You can pray silently. You can pray out loud if you want to. God, what are you speaking into me today? And just sit there in silence and ask God, is there a place that I'm living in denial? Is there a hurt in my life that's so deep I've blocked it out? Is there a habit that I know about that I think nobody else knows about? Is there a hang-up that's keeping me from being all that God wants me to be? Am I living in denial in any of those places? Or maybe you're just praying as God speaks to you. That you know that he exists, but maybe you're not really living as though he exists. Maybe you're here this morning and you think you're all alone in your hurt, your habit, and your hang-up, and you forget that God knows and that God cares. Or maybe God's whispering to you that you're like an appliance that's not plugged in. You're trying to generate your own power, your own victory. And God's just saying to you this morning, surrender. Give it up to me. The prayer team's going to come down to the front. They'll be here as the band leads us through one last song. If you need prayer about any hurt, habit, or hang up, I would encourage you to come visit with them. If you need prayer about anything in your life, come and give it to them. You can come to the altar by yourself. You can sit where you're at. You can stand where you're at. But just because I walk off the platform and the band begins to play and the prayer team comes down to the front doesn't mean that your time with God is done. You just continue to stay in whatever posture you need to stay in to let God speak to you and bring hope to your life.